Good evening. Welcome to the second official debate between the two Democratic candidates for City Controller. I am Ross Sandler, Professor of Law at New York Law School, one of the co-sponsors of the debate. The other co-sponsors are New York One News and WNYC Radio. Before we begin the debate, I'd like to introduce Nicole Gordon, Executive Director of the New York City Campaign Finance Board.
Welcome to the New York City Campaign Finance Board's second Democratic primary debate for controller candidates. The candidates debating are participants in New York City's government reform program that limits the influence of money on politics. The program gives public matching funds to candidates who agree to contribution and spending limits and to full disclosure of their campaign finances. To qualify for public funds, these candidates must also participate in debates. Information on the candidates and the debates can be found in the 2001 voter guide, which you should receive in the mail before the primary election. An interactive guide is also available on the board's website, www.cfb.nyc.ny.us. We hope you find this debate helpful as you prepare to vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now let's meet the candidates. On my left, City Council member Herb Berman, and next to him on his left, former Board of Education President Bill Thompson. Leading the questions tonight will be Carrie Lyon of New York One News and Andrea Bernstein of WNYC Radio. The rules for tonight's debate should allow for a free-flowing discussion. The debate will be largely unstructured. There will be no special order of questions and no time limits. We do ask that the candidates attempt to keep their answers short, however. Follow-up questions will be allowed, and the candidates will be permitted to respond to each other's comment. Towards the end of the hour, each candidate will be asked to question the other directly. There will be no opening or closing statements. Carrie Lyon of New York One News will begin the questioning.
Our first question is to Councilman Berman. In a March 14th interview with the New York Times, you said about your opponent, "We like each other, we're good friends." Now your attack ads and campaign literature accuse your opponent of breaking the law and skipping out on tax payments. How do you justify the negative tone of this campaign?
Well, I do like Bill. We have been friends for many, many years. I think that one of the significant issues in this campaign is the issue of integrity. The role of the controller requires that you have to lead by example. And I consistently urge that the issues being raised by the various articles in the newspapers be responded to. I felt that they weren't properly responded to. I felt that there were too many issues left outstanding, and as a consequence, what we did was reproduce the articles. I think the people have a right to judge Bill's qualifications predicated on those articles, so we did that. And they aren't negative ads. They're the truth that was produced in the newspapers. We just reproduced them.
They're obviously negative ads. Mr. Berman's campaign has obviously reached a point of desperation, and what he has done is to go negative. It has become, unfortunately, in a city like New York City, it has become a gutter, mudslinging type campaign that he has decided to run. I think it is a disservice to the voters of New York City. They're entitled to better than that. And reproducing something which is obviously a lie or false, and then justifying it later is a cheap excuse. So right now what's occurred is it has become, unfortunately on my opponent's part, a gutter-type, mudslinging, nasty campaign that is not befitting of the people of New York City.
Just to follow up, in what way has he lied?
Oh, the conversations, or when you start to talk about broke the law, that's absolutely untrue and false. It is not even close to being true. Absolutely a lie. When he continues to question my integrity, once again, the one thing that I've had in this city, the one thing throughout my career, is a high level of integrity. No one's ever questioned that. Unfortunately, to drag me down, Mr. Berman has decided to do that. Going back at a certain point on incidents that happened over 20 years ago to try and make a point is another cheap attempt on his part. So I've just found the whole effort on his part and his campaign's part to be false, misleading, distorted, and a lie.
Well, if I may, first of all, the issue of the tax liens. Yes, he indicated that one of the tax liens took place 20 years ago, but he doesn't properly or appropriately respond to the tax lien that was filed in 1997, which is not 20 years ago. That was very, very recently, within the last 4 years. I believe that that's an issue that's relative to the campaign. It's relative to the qualifications of comptroller. As to the issue of his licenses, I mean, I'll be glad to produce and give to Bill a section of the Security and Exchange Commission law that says specifically that unless you're a clerk or part of the administrative staff of a financial corporation, then you're required to be licensed. And Bill did not claim to be a clerical employee, did not claim to be part of the administrative staff. He said that he was a rainmaker.
Once again, this is a distortion. It was not having a securities license was not a prerequisite on the part of my firm. It wasn't a condition of employment. It simply wasn't needed. So for Mr. Berman to turn around 6 years later and attempt to, or 8 years later, and attempt to make up something later is just untrue.
Can we go on to... You want to finish?
Respond?
Let's go on to the next question, if we can. Andrea Bernstein.
Councilmember Berman, you've taken a quarter of your campaign cash from lobbyists. In fact, you accepted $35,000 from the real estate company of the Mets owner after you had voted to give $35 million of city tax money for the Brooklyn Cyclone Stadium, which is, of course, the Mets farm team. Now, your opponent is running a TV ad that says he can't be bought. He's suggesting you can be.
Yeah, well, that's complete nonsense. First of all, thousands of people have contributed to my campaign. People who are involved in city government as lobbyists, people who are real estate operators, senior citizens, workers, electricians, doctors, lawyers, whoever they may be. They all contributed to my campaign because they believe that I'm the person best qualified to be the next comptroller and to lead this city over the next 4 years in matters concerning the fiscal health of this city. So that is certainly an important part of it. Now, what's even galling to me, though, is that the same people that Bill Thompson complains about having contributed to my campaign are the people that he also solicited, except that they chose to contribute to me. And I want you to know that relative to the cyclones, which, by the way, has changed the face of Coney Island and is the best thing that has happened to Coney Island, I was asked to get involved by the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce and by the Brooklyn Sports Foundation because the people who were currently at that time trying to cause amateur sports activity to take place in Coney Island had over 13 years failed to accomplish that. I got involved at the request of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. I accomplished something terrific. Coney Island has benefited dramatically and is for the first time in the last 45 years that Coney Island has received the economic attention that it needed and required.
Just to follow up, if you are elected controller, there will obviously be many corporations that do business with the city that would be in a position to contribute to your campaign. Do you think that there's any appearance of conflict of interest when you make decisions that are favorable to contributors and then collect money from those same people?
Absolutely not. The people who contributed to my campaign because they have confidence in my ability to be the next comptroller, and they believe that I'm the person who's best qualified to do the job. That is the reason for those contributions solely and only. And I again stress that the same people who contributed to my campaign are people that Bill solicited. They just chose to support me.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, to be able to talk about Coney Island benefiting, Mr. Berman benefited. When you look at the minor league stadium that was built with close to $40 million of tax dollars, and the fact that a few weeks after Mr. Berman moved that through the city council and voted on it, that he received, it was closer to $50,000 in campaign contributions from Fred Wilpon and the Wilpon family and everyone else at Sterling Equities because they thought he was a good elected official. I find that hard to believe. At a certain point, what it does, whether directly or it is just the appearance of impropriety, it creates a problem and it undermines the public confidence in government. That's what it does.
No less so than the people on Wall Street who contributed to Bill. These are people who have historically
contributed to you, Mr. Berman.
Well, I'm saying that we agree.
No, we're not agreeing. At the same point, what we are talking about is an appearance of impropriety, given the fact that I'm not even sure if Mr. Wilpon was ever contributed to yours before that. But all of a sudden, it
Well,
seems
Bill,
a little
how
strange.
about letting me
A few
respond?
weeks, I was in the middle of conversation.
Yeah, I know, but you interrupted me to make that comment.
After, a few weeks
Bill, you
after-
interrupted me to make that comment. Please.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you both. Maybe we should go to another question and move this along.
I'm going to ask a follow-up to the question while we're talking about campaign contributions. There's been a controversy in the news of late about Comptroller Alan Hevesy having set up a meeting between a campaign donor and a member of the private sector in New York City that donor wanted to get a contract with. Comptroller Hevesy says this is part of promoting business development in the city. What is your opinion of this? Let's start with you, Mr. Thompson.
I think it's unfortunate that the whole situation has called Alan Hevesy's integrity into question. I have no doubt about his integrity. I think the one thing that has to be kind of a guide, and this question has come up before, is a guide of what you do. The question is, does it benefit the city? If things don't benefit the city and you've used your office to give someone advantage, that's wrong. That's wrong.
Is that what Comptroller Hevesy did here?
You know, something, all I know is what I see from a distance. I wouldn't be willing to say that Comptroller Hevesy has done anything wrong. I'm not close to that situation.
Would you do this as Comptroller? Would you set up a meeting between a campaign contributor and a private sector industry that had millions of dollars of city contracts?
I think you'd have to use, once again, the decision or using your own judgment as to whether it is in the best interest of the city somehow.
So you wouldn't rule it out?
Not being in a situation, and then not also, I've set up meetings over the years for hundreds of people, none of them contributors, all who had something to offer in one form or another. Would I stop helping people? No. Obviously, though, you have to be a little more cautious when it's a contributor, but you're not going to rule contributors out. Do they have something to offer? That's the bottom line.
Mr. Berman?
I believe that if, in fact, the person who has something to give to the city, benefit the city, the fact that that person may have been a contributor should not bar that person from sharing that benefit with the city.
Okay, but in this case, let's be clear on the facts. This was a contributor to Mr. Hevesy's campaign who wanted to get a contract with Bell Atlantic, now Verizon. Mr. Hevesy reached out to Bell Atlantic and said, would you meet with this gentleman? It wasn't about a city contract. It wasn't about city business. Do you think that benefits the city?
If, in fact, it was an introduction and there was no quid pro quo, then clearly there's not a violation of the law. I don't believe that Alan Hevesy would intentionally or deliberately violate the law.
But was it appropriate?
Was it appropriate? Not necessarily inappropriate. It depends upon whether or not it was done for the purposes of gaining contributions, or if it was done for the purposes of otherwise gaining a benefit. Merely introducing a person in and of itself does not constitute ipso facto a violation or necessarily an intrusion upon a man's integrity.
Next question from Carrie Lyon.
Bill Thompson, schools are opening today and tomorrow, and Chancellor Harold Levy is moving ahead with $150 million worth of cuts to after-school programs, sports programs, staff, etc. He blames the mayor and the city council. Is that fair, or is he blowing smoke?
He's being fair. He's being accurate. If you look at budget actions that were taken by the mayor and the city council last year, and actions that were taken by the mayor, Peter Vallone, and Mr. Berman this year, they've shortchanged the school system. What has occurred, and I have to admit, it's very disappointing, very depressing. Some of the things that I worked to do over the years, reintroduce arts and arts education back into schools, after-school programs focused on working with students who have problems with literacy, after-school sports programs, they're being curtailed right now. They're being curtailed because the city council, because my opponent and the mayor play politics with the lives of children. So is it accurate? Yes, it is. And it is unfortunate. And as I said, right now, the children are being made to suffer, and that's wrong.
But in a $12 billion budget, are there other places that could have been targeted instead of after-school programs, sports programs?
There is very little, whether people believe it or not, there's very little room within the larger budget. When people look at $12 billion, there are dollars that are passed through to parochial schools. There's debt service payments that are in that budget. There is the salaries. There's the buses each and every day that move children, the lunches, all of that's in that larger budget. I think outside sources, as they've looked at both size of administration as well as flexibility in other areas, whether it's independent budget office or others. They've all commented over a period of time, there's very little flexibility. So no, there are areas that you can cut. A lot of that has been cut. Administration has been reduced. In spite of that, the cuts and the dollars that have not been given to the Board of Education are impacting the children now, and that's the reality.
Mr. Berman.
Yeah, well, let's strip away the realities of what Bill said and expose the fact that the Chancellor has, in a vile manner, intruded upon children who rely upon programs that he has really sadly cut. Let's start with with the basic premise that the budget this year for education increased over last year. Let's also understand that what the Chancellor did was to come to the City Council and the Mayor and say, I want you to give me unrestricted aid. I want you not to ask me what I'm going to use the money for. Just give me the money and I'll exercise my discretion. And in so doing, he refused to indicate as to whether or not he would continue to feed a bloated, obvious bureaucracy, as opposed to going to the areas that we wanted him to go, which was to benefit the children in the classrooms. I think that's wrong. I think it's inappropriate. I think it's a lack of appropriate leadership. And I think he ought to be ashamed of himself by traumatizing programs like the READ program, etc., and instead of cutting where he had plenty of room to cut. You can't convince me that in a $12 billion budget, he had to cut programs that are important to children. Nonsense. Let me also say, by the way, that there is a memorandum of understanding now out there existing between the Mayor, the Council, and the Chancellor. The City Council, by Peter Vallone, the Speaker, has already signed that memorandum of understanding. If the Mayor is listening, by the way, I would urge the Mayor to come in and sign it. If the Chancellor is listening, I would urge him to stop threatening the children and come in and sign it. Two other brief points. Number one, the day we adopted the budget, I got a call from one of the Chancellor's assistants threatening that in the event we didn't give him this unrestricted aid, that he would turn around and he would tell all the superintendents that the money is being cut because of the City Council. I refuse to bow to that type of intimidation. I think that was wrong, and I just hung up on that person. So you know something? It is wrong. There's plenty of room to cut. The children have to come first.
Unfortunately, continuing to say that there's room, that there's room, that there's room, when the reality right now is that services are being reduced to children. It is a disgrace that spending has increased in other areas, but the reality is services are being cut to children. It is largely because of the budget that was passed in the City Council by the Council, by Mr. Vallone, by my opponent, and by the Mayor. And that's the reality. And the thing that I find is disgraceful is that schools will open tomorrow, at least all of schools, high schools being open today, all the schools open tomorrow with things that, we worked for years to reinstitute a number of these things back in schools, and now they're being cut. These are services being deprived and denied to children, and unfortunately, their lives are being played with. Politics is being played with the lives of children.
Let's go to another.
Excuse me, it's quite important. Let me just point out that the money that the Chancellor wanted, he asked for with the unrestricted aid, is there. That money is set aside. All he has to do is a simple little thing. Do something that constitutes accountability. Cut the bloated bureaucracy, put the money in for the children. I don't think that's much to ask. I think the Chancellor has ample opportunity to deal with it. I think he should deal with it. I think responsibility requires that he deal with it and start thinking that the children have to come first instead of perpetuating the bureaucracy.
Let's go to another question.
Question for you, Mr. Berman. One of the powers of the city controller is to object to city contracts when he or she believes there's corruption involved. Controller Hevesy and Mayor Giuliani have been feuding very vocally recently over a welfare-to-work contract. What would you have done if you were a controller and this contract passed your desk?
If, in fact, I felt that there was an issue of corruption involved in that contract, then I would hold it back and I would do an extensive investigation on my own, and I would seek whatever outside help I needed in order to accomplish that for the purposes of trying to make an independent determination as to whether or not, in fact, it warranted holding up the contract.
Do you think Comptroller Hevesy acted appropriately here?
I think that if Comptroller Hevesy felt that there was corruption, then yeah, he should hold it back. As to whether or not he has proven that, that's an issue that's not yet been determined.
Mr. Thompson?
I think what it highlights, because in fact those contracts wind up moving in the end, I think what it highlights is one thing, that the Comptroller needs additional authority, and I've talked about it before, in being able to say no to contracts. I think that's one of the charter changes that should be made in the city of New York. At the same point, would I refuse to authorize a contract if I thought corruption was involved? Absolutely. Absolutely. Go in, investigate, hold that contract. I think that's one of the prime roles of the Comptroller, to be able to provide oversight of contracts, to be able to speak out when the Comptroller sees problems with those contracts. So in this case, would I have held back if I had questions? Absolutely.
A follow-up question to both of you. The last two controllers have had different approaches with respect to contract oversight. Comptroller Elizabeth Holtzman was very aggressive in using this power. Comptroller Hevesy has used it much more judiciously. Which would you use as your model?
Who are you asking?
Let's start with you, Councilmember Berman.
All right, thank you. During my tenure as chair of the Finance Committee and prior to that time as chair of the Education Committee, I have repeatedly exercised the oversight of city agencies on a continuing basis. As a matter of fact, during my tenure as a finance chair, I believe we've had over 40 audits. We call it oversight, but it's audits of various functions of government. I'm a firm believer that there is nothing better to check the bureaucracy. There is nothing better than to guard against waste and inefficiency and save tax dollars than aggressive auditing policy. I'm a firm believer, and I think it's very, very essential. I would fine-comb the process. I would improve it. I would add and enhance the ability to do it, and I believe we'll be very successful in dealing with government waste and inefficiency.
Mr. Thompson, whose model would you follow?
Yeah, I think that I've talked about being aggressive as a controller, being a fiscal activist as a controller. I think it's important, as the controller provides oversight of contracts and agencies, that yes, those fiscal and performance audits are done aggressively, are released and made public. I think that it helps to aid in changing policy across city agencies. I also think it is good to involve others in the debate of how to improve, how to cut waste, how to eliminate inefficiency. But at the same point, I think one of the powers in audit is to be able to look at those agencies and make sure that the agencies of the city are providing fair share, equity to the city, to neighborhoods across the city. So I think it is, I tend to be a bit more aggressive. I think it's a power that you use aggressively on behalf of the people of the city.
Another question, Carrie Lyon.
Okay. Councilman Berman, one of the jobs of controller is to be the watchdog of the city budget. Given that you've helped craft the current city budget and would be partly responsible for any shortfalls in that budget, how would you as controller be an independent monitor and be able to criticize this budget in the future?
Because it is the role of the controller to audit, to monitor, and to otherwise deal with the operation of the budget. The controller doesn't determine whether or not the budget, the priorities set forth in the budget are valid items. That's up to the city council, and that's up to the mayor to decide in their budget deliberations. But it is the role of the controller to determine as to whether or not the functions, the missions that are included in that budget are carried out. It is a function of the controller to make certain that the missions are being carried out expeditiously, is being carried out in a way that does not cost an excess amount of money other than the amount of money that it is proposed to cost. That is the role of the controller. That is not a conflict. That's not in any shape, manner, or form inconsistent with carrying out oversight of the budget. Remember, it is the performance of the budget that the controller audits.
Yet the current controller has come out and criticized the current budget as something the city cannot afford. Are you saying that's not within his right to do that?
I didn't say that the controller has absolute right to comment on anything that he feels or she feels might be appropriate. You know, the controller can say or do what they want to do. The difference is, of course, that when Harrison J. Golden, who I believe was probably the best controller the city ever had, was in fact a controller, he aggressively got involved from the get-go anytime there was a budget for the purposes of lending his expertise and his knowledge to the process. Other controllers have chosen not to and would rather sit back retroactively commenting upon the budget, which I think kind of detracts from the criticism. But that's the controller's call. One wonders as to whether or not the criticism had more to do with substance than, in fact, the political realities of this year, since he and Speaker Malone are engaged in the mayoral debate.
I think it's clear that this year's budget, that the budget that was adopted, that Alan Hevesy commented on and went and testified about, is a budget that puts New York City at risk. I think it's a budget that, when you factor in $500 million in tax cuts in the face of a declining economy, was an irresponsible budget and a politically motivated budget. When you look at all the economic indicators that people have been looking at for months now, and we continue to see decline in want ads, people being laid off, Wall Street's profits down, law firms laying people off. When you look at all that, it's clear that this year's budget was an irresponsible one. And I think it is important that a controller speak out about a budget before it's passed and after it's passed. I think the current controller did that. So when you look at the budget that was passed, that the mayor's budget, Mr. Vallone's budget, Mr. Berman's budget, I have real issues with it. I think that, as I said, I'm in favor of tax cuts. They're good ideas. At the same point, timing is everything in tax cuts. If you don't time them correctly, they're fiscally irresponsible. And that's what's occurring. In addition to that, you look at the city's fiscal situation with the contracts that have been settled with the unions. That creates additional problems. So was it a budget that was imbalanced? Well, or was it a budget that made sense? When all of a sudden they approved the contracts with the uniformed services, and one of the first things the mayor talks about is cutting back in agencies. No, it's an irresponsible budget.
If I may. The Manhattan Institute today came out with a report that's really very interesting, and my opponent has consistently indicated his opposition to tax cuts. Yet the Manhattan Institute said that since 1997, tax cuts have resulted in a growth of 80,000 jobs in the city of New York. In addition to that, 1 in every 4 jobs in the city of New York since 1997 are attributable to tax cuts. I don't think that's bad policy. I think 80,000 people who are now working probably think that's good policy. Let me also talk about the budget that we adopted. And I think that by now Bill should have heard what I said in prior debates. And that is as follows.
And disagree with you.
Well, that's fine. Try to learn, though, Bill. The bottom line is that when we adopted the budget, we put in safeguards into this budget this year that are outstanding. For example, the year before, Wall Street's profitability, which is the amount of money they pay taxes on it, rose to $21 billion, and last year we estimated in our budget $15 billion in profitability. This year, because of our concerns with the economy, we reduced that to $5 billion. That was a very conservative move to prepare for a possible downturn. And by the way, the first quarter, Wall Street has already earned $4 billion, so we're on target to go considerably more. Additionally, we reduced revenues by $1 billion, another very conservative move. Finally, we rolled over $2.8 billion in a rainy day fund that I played a key role in establishing, that has given us the security to guard against any downturn. All people understand and know that as a consequence of these conservative moves that we've taken in adopting our budget, that no matter what the economy is, we will be able to withstand and maintain the integrity of our budget for at least another 2 years. That's good budgeting.
We are about halfway through, so we're going to vary the question a little bit, and I'm going to ask a question. We're here at New York Law School, and the audience is filled with New York Law School students, and one of them submitted a question to me, and I'm going to ask it. They observed that there are many candidates who are running for public advocate, for mayor, and for borough presidents, but only 2 for a controller. What is it with this position that so few wanted, and why do you want it?
Okay, may I answer first? Does it matter?
Yes, go ahead and answer first.
I think the role of comptroller is probably the one position in the city of New York that requires technical expertise, knowledge, experience, understanding. You have to be a person who understands how to do budgets. You have to be a person who understands economic policy. You have to be a person who understands how to do audits. You have to be a person who understands tax cuts and tax policy. There's a whole, you have to understand pensions. There is a whole assortment of technical information which obviously is intimidating to a lot of people. I mean, one of the reasons that I'm a candidate is I believe that I meet the criteria that I just described.
Bill?
I would say that the job does tend to intimidate people. Given the fact that you do have to have understanding of budget, you have to provide oversight of contracts, you oversee or you act as chief investment officer for 5 pension funds with total assets of somewhere about $90 billion, as well as the fact that you have to oversee public finance, the issuance of debt for the city, coupled with audits, coupled with the fact that you have to do and sign off on all settlements in the city of New York, tied also to the fact that in prevailing wage, you're the setter and enforcer of prevailing wage. It's a huge job. I think it's one of the reasons that I ran for it. It is a job that can benefit the city. It's a job that, given my background in public finance, given the fact that I've sat on 2 of the 5 pension boards in the city of New York, given the fact that as a member of the Board of Estimate, had the opportunity to sit and oversee budget and contracts, it's one I think gives me a background that has well prepared me for the position, that gives me the most diverse background, and one I think that puts me in a position of being able to say, I think I'm the best qualified person for the job.
Well, now we're going to let the candidates ask questions of each other, so we'll start with Bill Thompson. You may ask a question.
Okay. Mr. Berman, given the false, misleading, slanderous, gutter-type campaign that you are running, why would any New Yorker think that you would bring any distinction or integrity to the office of Comptroller?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think you should hold your feelings back, Bill. You have to.
I'm working on expressing myself.
I think that the people of the city of New York probably do and should appreciate the fact that I'm trying to qualify and otherwise define the issues that are before us clearly. The issues raised in those articles are issues, Bill, that reflect the qualifications of a person for the job. Hence, the fact that I brought that forth, the fact that we put this before the public, we did the right thing. We're informing the people.
Okay. You have a question?
Yeah. Well, would you expect otherwise?
Well, I anticipated you would be prepared.
Okay. Bill, when you were president of the board, Frank DiStefano, the former superintendent of District 15, came under intense scrutiny. Parents complained to you that Mr. DiStefano was wasting money and cutting important programs for children. Your only response to parents was a harassing letter saying that they were conducting, and I quote, a smear campaign against Mr. DiStefano, and I have the letter to that effect. Later, Mr. DiStefano was forced out when it was proven that he squandered over $2 million and put the district in a deficit where they had to cut important programs for children. How could you have allowed this to happen, Bill, under your watch as president of the board?
Well, I think I need first to, since you weren't there, I think I need to tell you the full story, or at least the real story, Herb, so that at least you can get your facts right. I think if you look, the parents came to the Board of Education at a public meeting and complained about Frank DiStefano, the superintendent at that point. The complaints, after we investigated and met with the parents on a couple of occasions, the complaints weren't focused on DiStefano's mismanagement in the district. They were concerned about one school that was closing and the fact that African American and Latino students would be going to another school. That's what they were complaining about. So did I, in fact, and then when they weren't satisfied with the response, they continued to engage in attacks, not against DiStefano, but against others. Did I write them saying how disappointed I was in the fact of what they were doing? Yes, I did. And so I know the facts of this case and investigated and met with people on this. So on this one, I'd suggest that perhaps you ask a different question because you don't know the facts on this.
Well, let's go back to the panel. Andrea Bernstein, next question.
You've both been talking, and most economists agree that the city economy is going to slow or perhaps sour. Can the controller be helpful in recommending specific cuts to the next mayor? Let's start with you, Mr. Thompson. Is there an agency, be specific, that you would recommend cutting, and is there an agency that you would say should not be cut under any circumstances?
I think that two agencies that I would strongly suggest no cuts be made would first be the Board of Education as well as the New York City Police Department. I think that education is the lifeline of the city, and I think that everything, including the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit, has shown that New York City's children are shortchanged and underfunded. So the Board of Education would be one area. Police and the reduction of crime and what it's meant to improvement of quality of life, I think that's another area one would have to be careful about. So those are two areas I'd be very careful about. Other agencies, and I'm not sure whether it's cuts or greater efficiencies, as you look at agencies like HRA, large agencies like that, particularly where contracts have been let to provide for job training. And I don't know that in looking at the number of jobs that people have been trained for, real jobs, I think that there are real problems there. So I would look at agencies like that to either make reductions or to make sure that those dollars were well spent. So that's an example of one agency, but two agencies that I would suggest no cuts be made at.
Mr. Berman?
I believe that in doing the budget, there are several areas that the controller's abilities and the controller's source of information and expertise can be helpful to the next legislature. For example, one of the things that I have consistently attempted to do is to put a cap on overtime spending. I believe that effectively, if we can, throughout the entire system, cause a limitation on overtime so that the various agencies would have to come back to the city council when they reach that cap to get consent to go beyond it, I think it would have greater accountability, and I think that that would result in saving money. Also, I think in the capital plan, I'm a firm believer in the benefits of value engineering. Value engineering, for those who don't know, is a process by which at the end of the completion of a capital project, you assign a team of experts, people who are either engineers, auditors, etc., who will examine the process to see how that capital plan, that capital project could have been done cheaper and more efficiently and quicker, and then to apply that knowledge to future capital programs, and you will save an awful lot of money. So I believe
well, those are obviously two ideas for saving money, but are there specific agencies you think could be cut, and are there specific agencies that you would not cut under any circumstances?
Well, I believe that education clearly, as I indicated in my opening comments, with a $12 billion budget, I think they can clearly be more efficient. I know that the New York Times had an article would describe that the transportation needs have been reduced by 2% in education, and as a consequence, they could easily have saved money that way, but yet the Board of Education put more money into their transportation needs. That's one example of how money could be saved. Certainly...
So are you saying that the Board of Education absolute dollars should be cut to the board?
Yeah, as long as it is not done in a way that impacts negatively on the children. That is the key. I believe that there is bloat. I think there is plenty of room that the Board of Education has for cutting money. I strongly believe that you have to seriously protect the integrity of the classroom, the integrity of the learning system, so as to make sure that we give adequate support to the teachers, the professionals, and the staff, and the children get the quality education that they deserve, which they haven't been getting.
And is there an agency you would spare?
Yeah, I probably, other than the overtime issue, I would certainly hold harmless the police department, and particularly the fire department. I believe the area of public safety is so closely identified with the well-being of the people that you would have to do that. And by the way, this city now is deemed to be the safest large city in the United States. As a consequence of that perception, that's only happened over the last few years, but as a consequence of that reality and that perception, we have dramatically increased tourism in the city, businesses been able
I'm
to
going to
flourish.
interrupt. We've drifted a little bit. I wanted to get Bill Thompson's answer to the question that was asked, if we
I
could.
thought he answered first.
I just have a bit of response.
Yes, okay.
I think we obviously have just agreed, which is strange, on one agency. But at the same point, given we strongly disagree on education, given the fact that that the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit points to the fact that New York City school children and school system is underfunded compared to almost every other municipality in this state, I can't believe that you would suggest that we make reductions in education. I just don't believe it.
Well, let me try to respond to that. You know, firstly, we have two budgets in the city of New York. One is the expense budget, one's a capital budget. Part of that capital plan involves the capital projects in at education. The Moreland Commission just came out with a scathing report condemning the management of the Board of Education's capital plan.
It's about the expense budget.
No, it's not.
It is.
No, it isn't. It's how you save money. One of the things that you do...
No, the question wasn't about how you would save money. The question was what agency's budget could be cut, just to be clear.
Well, okay. Well, relative to that, I stand fully by what I say, and I again refer to the article in the Times that indicates that there was room to cut because the transit needs at the Board of Education has been reduced by 2%, yet they continue to add more money to that part of the education budget. It's not necessary.
Let's go on to another question. Carrie Lyon.
Bill Thompson, you've said over and over that these $500 million in new tax cuts in this year's budget, they were a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Alan Hevesy said as mayor he would consider an income tax surcharge for education. Would you support this type of targeted tax increase?
I think one would have to be very careful about that. Right now, no, I don't support a tax increase for education. I do support increased funding, particularly on the state level, to education. I think that's one of the areas. New York City underfunds, but at the same point, the state dramatically underfunds. I would look to the state first for that equity, for the fairness that New York City students deserve. And as I said, once again, pointing to the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit, I think it's very clear that the state is the first culprit that needs to be dealt with when it comes to underfunding our students. So I wouldn't rule anything out, but at the same point, that's not where I'm pointing right now.
Councilman?
The fact that the state, the money that's due from the state is in fact due is an old story. You know, we've been dealing with that for years. The bottom line is, though, that we still have to prepare for a continued healthy economy in the city of New York. I have long been an advocate of directed, intelligent tax cuts as a method of fueling the economy. One of the areas that I early on proposed, I think it was about 10 years ago, was the reduction or the elimination of the sales tax on clothing purchases in the city of New York. As a direct consequence of that piece of legislation that ultimately was passed, thousands of jobs have been added to the city of New York. I have been a major proponent in the elimination of the commercial rent tax. As a consequence of that, businesses have stayed in the city of New York. I've attempted to propose the waiver of the mortgage recording tax to help stimulate the building industry in the city of New York for first-time home buyers. That's something that we're hoping that the state authorizes us to implement. That will also encourage the economy. You can use tax cuts to encourage the economy. We've done it. I've done it.
But if the economy continues to slow, is it possible you could support some tax increases?
I don't believe that tax increases have not proven that they have in any way helped stop an economic downturn. I mean, in the past, when we were in the fiscal crisis and we had no other alternatives, yeah, you can vote for a tax increase because the city was going down a drain and you had to put your finger in the dike and stop it from leaking like it was. Consequently, you have to be able to look at the time and the occasion and see what the economy is. There is no reason now at this juncture in this economy where we're at right now to increase taxes. That would be the exact opposite of what is the right thing to do.
Let me just ask a follow-up to that question, if I might. Did both of you think that the City Council was right, and I assume you did, Mr. Berman, since you were part of this, to vote for the surcharge in Safe Streets, Safe Cities? The tax surcharge that paid for the additional police officers in the early 1990s?
I think that it's one of the proudest things that I did in my entire tenure as a member of the City Council. If you were to ask me to select the one piece of legislation that I'm most proud of, it would be the Safe Cities, Safe Streets program that we implemented, and I had the responsibility of marshaling that piece of legislation through my committee.
And that did involve a tax increase.
Yeah, but once again, you refer back to the time. If you remember the time, people were leaving the city of New York in droves. Businesses were leaving the city of New York in droves. Crime was rampant. There were over 2,000 murders a year in the city of New York. Something had to be done in order to stem that horrific time. We met that requirement. We had the courage to go forth and say the time has come for a tax increase. Now, what we also did was to sunset the legislation, and as soon as the city got back on its feet and we were generating sufficient revenues, we did away with that surtax.
Obviously, you can never say never. Given a situation like back in the early 1990s, when Mayor David Dinkins moved forward with Safe Streets, Safe Cities, it was crucial to the city of New York, and a lot of people opposed it back then. But it was crucial to the city of New York and its continued viability and its improvement as a city. No one knows where the economic situation in this city is going to go. Obviously, a tax cut. So if you're asking about the early 90s, would I have voted for something like that? Yes. Obviously, I mean, as you move forward, tax increases are probably the last thing that you want to do. You have to make reductions in other areas before you increase taxes.
Not even for your prized area of education?
Education, as I said, which is why I pointed out and talked about the state. It's not a question of the state has owed the city money for a long time. This is based on, I talk about the state because it was tied to a lawsuit, which for the first time in the history of this city and state said that New York City's children are underfunded. Months of testimony, years of discovery went into that to highlight that fact. I don't think it's necessary right now. However, one needs to be aware of the fact, A, it's an underfunded system, and B, if we don't start to pay teachers real salaries, if we're not going to be competitive with every surrounding location, no, it's going to continue to have a school system that's going to have problems. So am I advocating tax increases? No, at this point I'm not. However, as I said, you never know where the city's fiscal situation is going to go in the future. You can't rule anything out if you're going to be a responsible comptroller.
You know, we have time now for a question by the candidates. So we'll start with Councilman Berman, another question to Bill Thompson, and then back again.
Bill, in your campaign literature, you stated that you spent years underwriting billions of dollars in municipal and state bonds as a senior vice president of public finance at an investment banking firm. Yet you repeatedly claimed that you didn't need a license. But according to the Security and Exchange Commission law, you must obtain a license, as I indicated before, and here is the SEC regulations, if you're operating in any capacity other than as a clerical or administrative support or similar function employment job. Regardless of title, if that's what you do, then you don't need a license. But if you do sales work, then you require a license. If you do anything else, you require a license. Bill, you know, straightening this out, what is right? Was your campaign literature right when you said you underwrote billions of dollars? Was it wrong? Were you a rainmaker? What was the capacity that you functioned in that firm?
Once again, I'm going to point out, no, a license wasn't needed for the job I did. However, what I am going to do is, and I know that you haven't spent any time on Wall Street, Herb, so I'm going to use a couple of phrases that will help you understand this. The phrase underwriting, if you look at underwrote or full, if you look at the bond buyer or other ways of measuring production and firms and the business that they do with any location in this country, it is full credit to lead, and the phrase is underwritten. Doesn't mean that you underwrote it yourself. Part of a firm that did that. Was I involved in that? Yes, I was. Was a license needed for it? No, it wasn't. So if you look at the phrase, or full credit to lead managers, full credit to individual managers, you're using the phrase underwritten. It's a generic term that's used on Wall Street all the time.
Do you have a question of the councilman?
I might be able to come up with one. I think that given the fact that in order to be comptroller, you need to be independent, how would you convince the public that you would be independent, given the fact that during your tenure in the city council, you've continued to vote with majority 9 out of 10 times, you voted for tax increases 90% of the time, and that you've increased your salary by over 350%. How would you somehow convince, so basically you've gone along to get along, how would you convince people, the public, that somehow you'd be independent now after a history in which you've shown that you haven't been?
Well, all right, let's talk about the salary increases first. Bill, if you want to be comptroller, then you have to understand the law. The law specifically requires that every 4 years, an independent commission has to be established for the purposes of determining and recommending the salary scale for all the elected officials in the city of New York. That recommendation is what we vote on. We don't vote to initiate our own tax increase.
But you can vote no.
I mean, pay raises. Yes. Now, Bill, let me also explain to you. There are times that I voted yes, and in 1991, because of the circumstances, because of the economy, I voted no. Well, let me ask you a question, Bill. Does that mean when you become comptroller, you're going to roll back the salary that we voted for the comptroller to the time that existed before the commission increased the salary for comptroller? I would expect not.
One of the things I might do would be, given where the city is in its fiscal history at that point, and given the status, Mark Green, if I remember correctly, refused to accept a pay increase.
Well, first of all,
given the city's fiscal situation.
That's precisely, Bill, what I did when I did not vote to increase our salary in 1991 because of the fiscal condition
so you
of
turned
the city.
You turned the salary back then?
No, we just voted not to increase our salary, Bill. Again, you have to understand the law. Now, as far as voting for tax increases, I'm proud of the fact that when this city was in desperate straits after the fiscal crisis, when we had a major crime epidemic here and we had to implement the Safe Cities program that Peter Vallone proposed, I voted for tax increases, and I had the courage to do it, even though it wasn't a politic thing to do. But I'm also proud of the fact that when our economy improved and we started generating revenues, I had the courage to propose tax cuts that help perpetuate this healthy economy. So I think my record is absolutely outstanding. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why Citizens Union endorsed my candidacy. And Cranes, by the way, also endorsed my candidacy because of the courageous step in the leadership role that I placed in my role as council chairman of the Finance Committee. And just to continue that, as a consequence of my chairmanship of the Education Committee, 3 former chancellors have also endorsed my candidacy. I think that reflects upon my competence, my ability, and my leadership qualifications.
We have about 5 minutes more, so we have time for one short question.
Okay. Councilman Berman, besides your opponent, there are no blacks running for citywide office this year. Do you think there's a value in a city like New York of having an African American in a citywide position?
I think that the most important issue facing the people is to elect the person who is best qualified to hold the office that that person aspires to attain. I think that clearly race has become an issue because of that, as you just described, but it shouldn't be. The only issue should be who is best qualified to hold that position. It is unfortunate that we go otherwise. Now, if we're going to look throughout the city, you will find that there is a potential that 4 of the 5 borough presidents will be minority people, 3 black, 1 Latino. It is likely that the next Speaker of the City Council will be a minority person, either black or Latino. So it's not that this city will be devoid of minority representation. The issue particularly in the role of comptroller, it's so important that the person with the best experience, the person with the best expertise, the person who has the best understanding of the role of the comptroller be elected to that position.
I think that diversity is important, particularly in a city like New York, that has as many people from different backgrounds and different neighborhoods and different countries. I think it's important. At the same point, that's not why I would suggest that people would support me or vote for me. I think it is something that is part of a resume, and I think your experiences and who you are add to your understanding of things. At the same point, what I've said to people is not to vote for me because I'm African American, but to vote for me because I'm the best qualified person. And I continue to say that across the city of New York. Does it, is it something, is it a list, is it part of my menu that I'm African American? Yes, I'm very proud of that. But that's not the reason that people should vote for me.
Another question? We have a few more minutes.
Very quickly, I would ask each of the candidates, starting with you, Mr. Thompson, how would you rank the last three controllers, Alan Hevesy, Elizabeth Holtzman, and Harrison Golden?
You have a minute to do this.
I think they've each brought very different qualities to the table.
Rank them 1, 2, 3.
I don't think you can, because I think if you look at it, Harrison Golden was a very strong comptroller, very combative, though, with the mayor of the city of New York. I think if you look at Liz Holtzman pressured Wall Street and brought diversity as an issue to that and was very beneficial. I think Alan Hevesy has done a very good job as far as increasing the number of audits, as far as continuing to professionalize that office. I think they each bring something to the table.
Mr. Berman?
I have repeatedly indicated that, in my opinion, Harrison J. Golden was the best controller the city ever had. I think he was unique. I thought he brought an expertise to government that was unique. I thought he shared his intelligence and his professional knowledge with the city to help it run better. I think were it not for him, it would have been that much more difficult to wend our way through the complexities of the fiscal crisis. So I believe clearly that he was the best controller the city has ever had. I think both Alan and Liz have strengths and they've had weaknesses, but in my book, Harrison Golden was clearly the best.
90 seconds.
Okay, as quickly as you can. Given the state of the city's economy, the economy nationally, Mr. Thompson, what's your view of using city tax dollars for new stadiums for the Yankees and the Mets?
I think that right now you'd have to wait to see what each individual deal looked like and what it's provided in benefit to the city. I think it is clear if you look at some of the stadiums, the minor league stadiums that have been done. There's been a lot of dollars expended, but not a lot of revenue that's come directly to the city. One would have to evaluate each deal individually before you made a decision.
But city tax dollars could be used.
Possibly, but as I said, I think you'd have to see. You'd want those owners to put their money in and huge portions of their dollars in to those stadiums.
You know, I absolutely agree. I don't think that any proposal has come forth that gives us sufficient information to be able to draw an opinion as to whether or not we could or could not support it. Theoretically, I'm not necessarily opposed to funding a new stadium, but you're right. I want to know how much the team is going to put into it. Will they be substantial donors to it? What will be the benefit to the city? And by the way, as far as the minor league stadium in Coney Island, you know, people are sleeping overnight in order to get tickets to the playoff games, and they're sleeping in Coney Island. You know, that's pretty good for a minor league team, and go Cyclones.
Okay, that brings us to the conclusion of this debate.